Imagine this. In the heart of World War II, the Japanese Empire sprawled across the Pacific like an unbreakable shield, with thousands of islands transformed into deadly traps waiting to devour any invader. They were convinced their vast ocean fortress would crush the American spirit forever. But what if I told you that a secret American plan turned that very strength into Japan's fatal flaw, without even touching most of those islands? A strategy so cunning it left elite Japanese commanders reeling in disbelief, wondering how their empire was crumbling from the inside out. Stay with me because this tale of ingenuity and determination reveals hidden truths about the Pacific War that could change how you see history's greatest comeback. The story begins with a day that shook the world, December 7, 1941. Japanese planes roared over Pearl Harbor, catching the U.S. Pacific Fleet off guard and plunging America into the deadliest conflict in history. In the months that followed, Japan's forces moved with lightning speed, seizing Guam, Wake Island, the Philippines, Singapore, and the Dutch East Indies. By mid-1942, their empire stretched over 4,000 miles, a colossal barrier defended by fortified bases and fanatical troops. Japanese leaders, including Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the architect of Pearl Harbor, knew their initial triumphs were fueled by surprise, but they bet on their island defenses to make any counterattack a nightmare. Yamamoto himself had confided that Japan could dominate for 6 months to a year, but beyond that, America's resources might overwhelm them. Little did they know how prophetic those words would become. As 1943 approached, the United States was transforming into a wartime powerhouse. Shipyards from California to Virginia churned out destroyers, cruisers, and aircraft carriers at a rate Japan couldn't match, often 10 times faster. Factories produced fighters like the P-38 Lightning and bombers like the B-24 Liberator in staggering numbers. This industrial surge wasn't just about quantity, it was about innovation with new radar systems, improved torpedoes, and amphibious vehicles that could storm beaches under fire. Meanwhile, Japan's supply lines were stretched thin across the endless Pacific, vulnerable to American submarines that began sinking merchant ships loaded with oil, food, and ammunition. The ocean's immensity, once Japan's ally, was turning against them. The challenge for American commanders was immense. The Pacific covered over 60 million square miles, dotted with hundreds of enemy-held islands, each potentially a bloodbath to capture. A full frontal assault on every one would drain years and lives. Estimates suggested up to 1 million American casualties. That's when a revolutionary concept emerged from the minds of two brilliant leaders, General Douglas MacArthur, overseeing the Southwest Pacific, and Admiral Chester Nimitz, commanding the Central Pacific. Their idea? Island hopping. Instead of grinding through every fortified position, they'd selectively target key islands that offered airfields, harbors, or strategic positions for the next advance. The rest, bypassed entirely, their garrisons left isolated, supplies cut off, slowly neutralized without a fight. This wasn't just tactics, it was a psychological masterstroke. Japanese doctrine emphasized no surrender, turning every island into a potential last stand. But by leaping past them, Americans forced Japan to waste resources on useless outposts. Intelligence played a crucial role here. Codebreakers in the MAGIC program deciphered enemy messages, revealing weak points and troop movements. Aerial scouts and submarine patrols mapped the terrain, identifying must-have targets like those in the Gilbert and Marshall chains. The strategy's first major proving ground was Guadalcanal in the Solomon Islands. In August 1942, U.S. Marines landed amid fierce resistance, enduring 6 months of grueling combat in steamy jungles. Malaria, shortages, and constant attacks tested their resolve, but victory there marked America's first offensive win in the Pacific. It also highlighted the horrors of island warfare, over 7,000 Americans and 30,000 Japanese lost. Guadalcanal taught a vital lesson: such costs couldn't be repeated endlessly. So, planners refined island hopping, focusing on efficiency. By late 1943, operations like Cartwheel targeted Rabaul, Japan's massive base in New Britain. Rather than a direct invasion, Allies seized nearby islands, built airstrips, and bombed Rabaul into irrelevance, trapping 100,000 troops without firing a shot on the main fortress. As the campaign unfolded, Japan's admirals grappled with confusion. Their rigid mindset couldn't adapt to this fluid approach. Islands they poured resources into sat abandoned, their defenders demoralized. America's mobile task forces, carriers protected by screens of destroyers, struck with precision, always one step ahead. This set the stage for leaps that would bring the war to Japan's shores, exposing vulnerabilities no one in Tokyo had foreseen. The leap into the Marshall Islands in January 1944 marked the true acceleration of America's island-hopping campaign, proving the strategy's devastating efficiency. Operation Flintlock targeted the atolls of Kwajalein and Majuro, key gateways in Japan's outer defenses. Japanese commanders anticipated attacks on their heavily fortified positions like Jalawat or Mealy, pouring resources there. But U.S. intelligence, fueled by cracked codes and relentless reconnaissance, revealed vulnerabilities elsewhere. Admiral Nimitz chose the path of least resistance, striking where defenses were thinner and surprise could be maximized. Pre-invasion bombardments from battleships and carriers were unprecedented in intensity, softening beachheads with thousands of shells and bombs. When Marines and Army troops stormed ashore on January 31st, resistance crumbled faster than expected. Kwajalein fell in days with American casualties remarkably low compared to earlier bloodbaths, around 300 killed across the atoll chain, versus thousands of Japanese defenders wiped out or captured. Majuro was seized almost without a fight, providing a perfect fleet anchorage. Bypassed islands in the group were left isolated, their garrisons watching helplessly as American forces built airstrips and supply depots, turning the Marshalls into launch pads for the next advance. This swift victory stunned Tokyo. Japan's rigid belief in defending every position left them unprepared for selective strikes that rendered their fortifications irrelevant. Stranded troops on bypassed atolls faced slow starvation, their morale collapsing as radio silence replaced promises of relief. The psychological impact was profound. Japan's once invincible perimeter was being picked apart methodically, not conquered inch by inch. By mid-1944, the campaign reached its most audacious phase, the Mariana Islands. Capturing Saipan, Tinian, and Guam would place B-29 superfortress bombers within range of Japan's home islands, a prospect that terrified Tokyo. The Japanese Navy, desperate to halt this thrust, committed its remaining carrier strength to a decisive counterstrike, Operation Ago. What followed was the Battle of the Philippine Sea on June 19 to 20, forever remembered as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. American pilots, flying superior F-6F Hellcats equipped with advanced radar and better training, met waves of Japanese aircraft launched from carriers far beyond visual range. U.S. radar detected the incoming raids early, allowing fighters to intercept at altitude. In the skies west of the Marianas, American aviators shredded enemy formations. Over 600 Japanese planes were destroyed, many before they could even reach the fleet, while U.S. losses stayed under 130, most from operational mishaps rather than combat. Japanese carrier aviation, already short on experienced pilots after Midway and other losses, was virtually annihilated. Admiral Ozawa's force limped away, leaving the seas and skies to American dominance. With air superiority secured, ground forces pressed the invasion of Saipan, beginning June 15. Marines and Army troops faced ferocious resistance from 31,000 defenders dug into caves, cliffs, and bunkers. The fighting was brutal. Flamethrowers cleared hidden positions, artillery duels raged across rugged terrain. Japanese Commander General Yoshitsugu Saito organized desperate counterattacks, including massive banzai charges. Yet by July 9, Saipan was secure. The cost was high, over 3,000 Americans killed and 10,000 wounded, but the Japanese garrison was nearly annihilated with only about 1,000 taken prisoner. Tragically, thousands of civilians perished, many in mass suicides driven by propaganda fears of American atrocities. Guam followed in late July, recaptured after 3 weeks of intense combat, restoring U.S. territory lost in 1941. Tinian, taken shortly after, proved easier thanks to clever deception. Marines landed on unexpected narrow beaches thought unusable, catching defenders off guard. These victories delivered airfields for B-29s, whose first raids on Japan began by late 1944. The psychological shock in Tokyo was immense. Prime Minister Tojo resigned, and Emperor Hirohito faced the reality that the war had reached Japan's doorstep. Island hopping had evolved into a relentless machine. Each captured base extended American reach while stranding tens of thousands of Japanese troops on bypassed islands, Rabaul, Truk, and others, where they withered without supplies. Submarines and aircraft ensured no convoys broke through. This approach saved countless American lives by avoiding unnecessary battles, yet it exposed the human cost of war. Isolated soldiers reduced to eating grass and roots, their sacrifice meaningless in a strategy that prized mobility over conquest. As 1944 drew to a close, the path to the Philippines opened, setting the stage for MacArthur's promised return and the final unraveling of Japan's empire. The leaps grew bolder, the victories more decisive, and the end drew nearer with every bypassed fortress turned prison. The stage was set for the most dramatic return in military history. General Douglas MacArthur had vowed in 1942 as he evacuated the Philippines under Japanese assault, "I shall return." By October 1944, that promise became reality with the invasion of Leyte in the central Philippines. This bold leap bypassed heavily fortified Formosa and the Ryukyu chain, striking straight at Japan's southern lifeline to oil and resources in the East Indies. The move split the empire, isolating southern forces and opening the path to the home islands. The landings began on October 20 amid massive naval support. Beaches were secured quickly, but the Japanese responded with their final great naval gamble, the Battle of Leyte Gulf, the largest naval engagement ever fought. Their Shogo plan aimed to lure Admiral Halsey's powerful Third Fleet away with a decoy force while battleships and cruisers smashed the vulnerable invasion fleet. It nearly worked. Halsey chased the decoy north, but the tiny escort carriers of Taffy 3 off Samar turned the tide. Outgunned destroyers like the USS Johnston charged battleships head-on, launching torpedoes and drawing fire to protect the vulnerable transports. Their heroic stand delayed the Japanese long enough for air attacks and reinforcements to arrive. By battle's end, Japan had lost 4 carriers, 3 battleships, 10 cruisers and countless smaller ships, effectively ending their navy as a fighting force. Leyte fell after weeks of hard fighting, but the campaign continued into 1945 with landings on Luzon and other islands. MacArthur's forces pushed north, liberating Manila in brutal urban combat that left the city in ruins. Bypassed Japanese garrisons in the southern Philippines and elsewhere across the Pacific. Over 100,000 men on islands like Truk, Rabaul and Paliliu were left to starve and wither. Supplies dwindled to nothing. Soldiers survived on roots, insects and rainwater, their once proud units reduced to skeletal shadows. This silent neutralization saved American lives while breaking Japanese morale from afar. The final, unavoidable leap came at Okinawa in April 1945. Only 350 miles from Kyushu, it was the last major stepping stone before the planned invasion of Japan proper. The Japanese, having learned from earlier defeats, turned the island into a fortress of caves, tunnels and artillery emplacements. Kamikaze attacks intensified. Over 1,900 suicide planes targeted the fleet, sinking or damaging dozens of ships and claiming thousands of sailors. On land, Marines and Army troops fought through rain-soaked ridges and coral ridges in some of the fiercest combat of the war. Hills changed hands repeatedly, flamethrowers and satchel charges cleared hidden positions. After 82 days, Okinawa was secured in June, but at a staggering price. Over 12,000 Americans killed, 50,000 wounded, and more than 100,000 Japanese soldiers and Okinawan civilians lost. Okinawa placed American bombers and invasion fleets within striking distance of the homeland. B-29s from the Marianas already firebombed Japanese cities nightly, turning urban centers into infernos. Yet Japan's leadership refused to yield, preparing for Ketsugo, the decisive battle on the home islands. Civilians were armed with bamboo spears, schoolchildren drilled for defense, mass suicide was glorified as honorable. Intelligence intercepts revealed preparations for fanatical resistance that could cost millions of lives on both sides. Something unimaginable would be required to end the stalemate. On August 6, 1945, the Enola Gay dropped the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima, vaporizing much of the city in an instant and claiming tens of thousands of lives. 3 days later, Nagasaki suffered the same fate. The shock shattered Japan's resolve. With no navy, no air force, cities in flames, and now this new incomprehensible weapon, the Emperor intervened. On August 15, Hirohito broadcast Japan's surrender, his voice trembling as he spoke of a new and most cruel bomb that threatened the extinction of civilization if the war continued. The Pacific War ended without the bloodbath of a home island invasion. Stranded garrisons across bypassed islands learned of defeat through crackling radios or leaflets dropped from American planes. Many refused to believe it at first, some held out for years. The island-hopping campaign had achieved the impossible, crossing 4,000 miles of ocean in under 4 years, dismantling an empire through precision rather than brute force, saving countless lives by avoiding unnecessary battles, and proving that strategy, logistics, and adaptability could overcome even the most determined foe. In the aftermath, the Pacific Islands bore silent witness: cratered beaches, rusting wrecks, forgotten bunkers. Japan, once bent on conquest, rebuilt as a peaceful economic giant under American occupation. The United States emerged as the dominant Pacific power, its innovative approach studied by militaries worldwide. Island hopping wasn't merely a tactic, it was a revolution that showed wars could be won by choosing battles wisely, turning an enemy's greatest strength, vast territory, into its fatal weakness. The courage of those who fought, the brilliance of those who planned, and the sacrifices on distant shores remind us that history's turning points often come from unexpected ideas executed with unyielding determination. The leaps across the Pacific didn't just end a war, they reshaped the world.